Dear Joe, they said the jungle belonged to the Japanese. Son, said these islands were their territory, their fortress, their unassailable domain where no American force could hope to survive, much less prevail. But after 6 months in this green hell, I can tell you the truth. It belongs to no one, not even God. The jungle doesn't care about flags or empires or which side speaks which language. It just kills, slowly and impartially, through disease and heat and rot and the 1,000 ways that tropical wilderness destroys human bodies. And if the jungle doesn't kill you first, then men with rifles will try. Men who've been taught that dying for their emperor is the highest honor, who charge into machine gun fire, screaming and believing they're already dead, who would rather perish than surrender. We beat them anyway, Joe. Not just beat them, we annihilated them. 14,800 Japanese soldiers came to this island, thinking they'd drive us back into the sea, thinking their warrior spirit and fanatical courage would overcome our numbers and our firepower. They're gone now, son. Dead from our bullets and our artillery and our air support. Dead from starvation when we cut their supply lines. Dead from disease when they ran out of medicine and food and hope. The ones who survived, maybe 10,000, barely more than skeletons, they evacuated in secret 3 days ago, sneaking away in the night like ghosts, admitting defeat without admitting it, leaving this island to us and to the jungle and to the ghosts of everyone who died fighting for it. I'm writing this from a foxhole that's been my home for longer than I care to remember. Rain drumming on my helmet, mud up to my ankles, the smell of rot and cordite and human decomposition so thick you can taste it. My M1917 Browning machine gun sits beside me, cleaned and oiled despite the conditions, ready to fire even though the fighting's finally over. 43 years old, Joe, and I'm living in a hole in the ground on an island I'd never heard of a year ago, commanding Marines half my age, teaching boys who should be in college how to kill efficiently and survive impossibly, and maintain their humanity when everything around them is designed to strip it away. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and comment if someone in your family served in the Pacific. Their courage and sacrifice built the world we stand on today. Because what we did here on Guadalcanal matters beyond just one battle, beyond just one island. We stopped the Japanese advance, proved they could be beaten, showed that American industrial might and military determination could overcome any advantage they thought they had in experience or fanaticism or willingness to die. My name is Frank D., Gunnery Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, 1st Marine Division, Company H. I'm 43 years old from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and before this war, I was a foreman in a steel mill and a part-time baseball coach for the local youth league. That's where you learned the game, Joe, remember? Those summer evenings in our backyard, me pitching and you learning to swing, both of us pretending you were Lou Gehrig, and I was some rookie trying to strike you out. You'd connect sometimes, send the ball over the back fence into the Johnson's yard, and I'd whoop and holler like you just won the World Series. Summer of '39, that's the memory I keep coming back to in this jungle hell. You were 15, all gangly arms and enthusiasm, wearing that old glove I'd given you for your birthday. The grass was freshly cut. I can still smell it, son, clean and green and so different from the rot that surrounds me here. And we'd practice until the sun set behind the mill's smokestacks, painting the sky in golds and reds that seemed impossibly beautiful in their simplicity. We'd share a root beer between innings, passing the bottle back and forth, and you'd ask me about work at the mill, and I'd tell you about tonnage and production quotas, and the honest satisfaction of making steel that built bridges and buildings, and the infrastructure of American prosperity. The sound of the bat connecting with the ball, that distinctive crack that every baseball player knows, that's what I hear sometimes when I'm trying to sleep in this foxhole. The crack of wood on leather, your laugh when you'd hit a good one, the hum of cicadas in the evening air, the distant sounds of other families doing their evening routines in that working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and life felt stable and predictable and safe. The taste of that root beer, sweet and fizzy and cool. The feel of the old glove leather in my hands, rough and broken in from years of use. The touch of your hand when we'd shake after a good practice, me teaching you that men congratulate each other properly, with firm grips and direct eye contact and respect for effort, regardless of outcome. That was the world before, Joe. Before Pearl Harbor and war declarations and Marines landing on tropical islands to fight for ground nobody back home had ever heard of. That was when I thought my fighting days were behind me, when I figured I'd done my time in the Great War and could live out my years making steel and coaching baseball and watching my son grow into a man without worrying that he'd have to do what I'm doing now. But then they attacked us, son. December 7th, 41, and suddenly we were at war. And I couldn't just sit home polishing baseball trophies while boys like you went off to fight. Re-enlisted at 41 years old, told the recruiter I'd been a Marine in the first war and I could be one again in this one. They were skeptical. 41 is old for combat, especially for the kind of warfare we're fighting in the Pacific. But the Corps needs experienced NCOs, needs men who can lead and train and keep young Marines alive through situations that would break inexperienced leaders. So they took me, promoted me to gunnery sergeant, and here I am, Guadalcanal, Joe. Say that name and remember it, because it's where American boys proved they could beat Japanese soldiers, where we stopped an empire's advance and started pushing back, where the myth of Japanese invincibility died in jungle mud and machine gun fire. We landed here in August of 42, first major American offensive operation of the war, taking an airfield the Japanese were building that would have let them bomb supply lines to Australia. They didn't expect us, weren't ready for an amphibious assault in force, and we took the airfield, Henderson Field we call it now, without much resistance. But then they came back, Joe. Came back with reinforcements and determination and orders from Tokyo that Guadalcanal must be retaken at any cost. And for 6 months, this island became hell on earth, became a testing ground for which nations' military could endure worse conditions, sustain heavier losses, maintain their combat effectiveness despite disease and hunger and psychological strain that pushed men to their breaking points and beyond. The jungle here is unlike anything we have back home, son. It's not like the woods in Pennsylvania where you can see through the trees and orient yourself by landmarks and feel like you're in nature rather than being consumed by it. This jungle is dense, oppressive, hostile to human life. Vines thick as your arm wrap around everything. Trees grow so close together you can barely see 10 yards ahead. Undergrowth tangles your feet and tears at your uniform and conceals enemies until they're close enough to kill you. The heat is suffocating. Humidity so thick you feel like you're breathing water. Sweat pouring off your body constantly. Uniforms rotting on your back from moisture and wear. And the rain, Joe. It rains here like God's trying to wash the island into the sea. Not gentle rain like back home, but torrential downpours that turn foxholes into ponds, that make every ridge a mudslide, that pounds on your helmet like hammers until your head aches, and you can't hear anything except water hitting metal. Everything's wet all the time, rifles rusting despite constant maintenance, ammunition corroding, feet developing rot from never being dry, skin breaking down from constant moisture and tropical diseases we don't even have names for. The mosquitoes carry malaria. The jungle carries dysentery and dengue fever and half a dozen other diseases that'll kill you as surely as any bullet. We lose more men to illness than to combat some weeks, men burning with fever in their foxholes, men too weak to fight but fighting anyway because there's no one to replace them, men dying slowly from preventable diseases because we're on an island thousands of miles from proper medical care. And through it all, the Japanese keep attacking. Night attacks mostly, because they learned early that attacking in daylight against American firepower is suicide. They come screaming out of the jungle in the darkness, hundreds of them at once, charging fixed positions with bayonets and swords, willing to die as long as they can kill some of us first. They don't fear death, Joe. That's what makes them so dangerous and so tragic. They've been taught that dying for the emperor is glorious, that surrender is shameful, that the only honorable outcome is victory or death. So they choose death again and again, and we give it to them because we have no choice. August 21st, 42. That's when I learned what this war was really going to be like. When I understood that everything I'd experienced in the Great War, trenches and artillery and gas attacks, was preparation for something even worse. We'd been on the island maybe 2 weeks, still consolidating our positions around Henderson Field, still learning the terrain and the conditions and what it meant to fight in jungle warfare. Intelligence reported that a Japanese force of maybe 800 men was approaching from the east, planning to attack across the Tenaru River and retake the airfield. We set up defensive positions, dug in along the western bank of the river, placed machine guns in overlapping fields of fire, registered artillery coordinates, did everything by the book to prepare for an attack we knew was coming. I commanded a .30 caliber Browning position, good weapon, heavy but reliable, with a crew of 3 Marines who'd never seen combat before this deployment. Boys from Iowa and Texas and New York, barely out of training, looking to me for leadership and confidence, and the kind of experience that only comes from surviving situations that should have killed you. They came at night, Joe. Came screaming and running across the river in a banzai charge, hundreds of them, believing their attack would overwhelm us through sheer ferocity and willingness to die. And we killed them, son. Killed them by the hundreds. Machine guns cutting into massed infantry at close range. Every burst finding targets because there were so many targets you couldn't miss even if you tried. The river turned red, literally red with blood. Bodies piling up in the water. Wounded men drowning because they couldn't reach the banks. My Browning fired until the barrel glowed red, until I had to use asbestos gloves to change belts, until my crew was deaf from the noise, and I was hoarse from shouting orders over the sound of continuous fire. We fired 1,500 rounds that night, maybe more, I lost count. And every burst meant men dying, meant Japanese soldiers, somebody's sons, somebody's brothers, somebody's fathers, falling into water that ran black with blood and cordite and the waste of human bodies torn apart by machine gun fire. They kept coming, Joe. That's what I can't explain to people who weren't there. They kept coming even when it was obvious they couldn't win, even when the river was choked with their dead, even when any rational military force would have retreated or surrendered. They kept coming because their code, their bushido or whatever they call it, said that dying in a charge was honorable and retreating was shameful. So they died, 800 men in one night, almost none of them making it across the river, almost none of them surviving to see dawn. When the sun came up and we could finally see what we'd done, I vomited, Joe. 41 years old, veteran of the First War, thought I'd seen everything there was to see about combat, and I vomited at the sight of what modern warfare does to human bodies when you apply industrial-scale firepower to massed infantry. The river was choked with corpses, the banks lined with dead, the jungle reeking of blood and cordite and human waste. And we had to stay there, had to maintain our positions amid that carnage, had to smell it for days until we could get burial details to clear the bodies. That's when I understood what this war would be, son. Not the clean warfare of earlier eras, not battles with clear fronts and organized retreats and prisoner exchanges. This would be total war, industrial war, the kind where American productivity and firepower would be applied until the enemy simply couldn't continue fighting. For every rifle the Japanese carried, we had 5. For every bullet they fired, we fired 50. For every soldier they could field, we could field 10, better fed, better equipped, better supported by logistics and industry and the vast resources of a nation that hadn't been exhausted by years of warfare. I need to tell you about the Marines I serve with, Joe, because they're the reason we won. The reason 14,000 Japanese soldiers couldn't push us off this island despite attacking again and again for 6 months. These boys, and son, they are boys, 18 and 19 and 20 years old mostly. These boys became men in this jungle, became warriors in circumstances that would have broken older and supposedly tougher men. They deserve to be remembered. Corporal Harris K. We call him Red for his hair, though it's so caked with mud now you can barely tell what color it is. Red's from Chicago, worked in a brewery before the war, always has a joke or a laugh even when we're up to our necks in mud and under fire. We'll scare the emperor right off his throne, he says, grinning through malaria and exhaustion and conditions that should make humor impossible. But that humor is survival, Joe, is how men stay sane when sanity should be impossible, is how we remind each other that we're still human despite everything this war demands of us. Red runs a Browning automatic rifle in my squad, and he uses it like a surgeon uses a scalpel, precise and controlled despite the weapon's tendency to climb when fired on full automatic. He saved my life twice that I know of, probably more times I don't know about, spotted enemy positions I'd missed and eliminated threats before they could eliminate us. The kind of Marine every NCO wants in his unit, the kind who will follow orders and also question them when they don't make sense, who'll fight like hell and also think tactically instead of just reacting. Lieutenant M.T. is our platoon commander, young officer, maybe 23, fresh from training when we landed, but aged 20 years in 6 months of combat. Quotes scripture before firefights, recites psalms and proverbs like they're tactical instructions, finds spiritual meaning in circumstances that seem designed to prove God's absence rather than his presence. "The Lord is my shepherd," he'll say before we move out on patrol. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." And then we go into jungle that's green, but nothing like pastures, that's hostile and deadly and filled with men trying to kill us. Some Marines think T's religion is foolish, think praying before combat is wishful thinking that won't stop bullets or prevent disease. But I understand what he's doing, Joe. He's maintaining connection to something beyond this war, keeping faith that there's meaning and purpose and divine providence, even when evidence suggests otherwise. That takes its own kind of courage, believing in goodness when surrounded by evil, trusting in salvation when death is the most likely outcome. And then there was Private Donnie W. A kid from Nebraska, barely 18, kept a harmonica and played Home on the Range after battles, his way of processing what we'd just experienced, his way of reminding us that home still existed, even though it felt impossibly distant. Donnie was quiet mostly, didn't joke like Red or philosophize like T. Just did his job and played his harmonica and wrote letters to his mother that he never got to send because we couldn't get mail off the island reliably. Donnie died at Bloody Ridge, Joe. September 12th through 14th, 3 days of Japanese attacks trying to break through our lines and reach Henderson Field. Wave after wave of banzai charges, thousands of enemy soldiers throwing themselves against dug-in Marines who'd learned that the only way to stop a banzai charge is to kill everyone participating in it. Donnie was in a foxhole 50 yards from mine, firing his M1 Garand until it overheated, fixing bayonet when they got close, fighting hand-to-hand in darkness and mud and chaos that made hell seem welcoming by comparison. Found him after the battle, Joe. Found him with 3 dead Japanese soldiers around his foxhole and his rifle still in his hands and a wound in his chest that had probably killed him instantly. Found his harmonica in the mud beside him, that simple instrument that had given us all comfort after fights, that had reminded us we were still capable of creating beauty despite being surrounded by death. I kept it, son. Kept Donnie's harmonica in my pack, never played it because I can't make music, and because it feels wrong to play it when Donnie's the one who should be playing. But I carry it as a reminder of what we lost, of who he was, of the cost we pay for every inch of this cursed island. We won, Joe. I said that at the start of this letter, and I need to say it again because sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. We won despite the conditions, despite being outnumbered at times, despite disease and limited supplies and the psychological strain of 6 months of combat, with no rotation, no rest, no relief except death or evacuation from wounds. The Japanese gave up, evacuated their survivors, admitted defeat without admitting it by simply leaving in the night and not coming back. But victory doesn't feel like I thought it would, son. Doesn't feel triumphant or glorious, or like something worth celebrating. It feels like exhaustion and relief, and the slow realization that I survived when better men didn't, younger men who had more years ahead of them and more to offer the world than a 43-year-old steel mill foreman turned Marine NCO. 14,800 Japanese dead, Joe. I've seen the intelligence estimates, read the after-action reports, and that number haunts me. Not because I regret killing them. We had no choice. They were trying to kill us. This is war, and war means killing the enemy before they kill you. But because 14,800 is a number so large it stops being a number and becomes an abstraction, becomes a statistic that doesn't capture the reality of 14,800 individual deaths, 14,800 men who woke up one morning and didn't survive the day, 14,800 families who'll receive notifications that their sons or brothers or fathers aren't coming home. Most of them didn't die from our bullets, Joe. They died from starvation because we cut their supply lines, from disease because they ran out of medicine, from slow, grinding attrition because we had resources and they didn't, because American industry could keep us supplied while Japanese logistics couldn't do the same for them. That's the real lesson of Guadalcanal, son. Not that American Marines are braver than Japanese soldiers, because they're not. Both sides have courage. Both sides have men willing to die for their causes. The difference is that we have factories and transport ships and supply lines that keep us fed and armed and equipped, while they have courage and fanaticism and nothing else. Courage without logistics loses to logistics every time, and now they've learned to fear us, Joe. Not fear our individual soldiers, not fear our tactics or our training, but fear what we represent. A nation with industrial capacity they can't match, with resources they can't compete against, with the ability to field armies and supply them and replace losses faster than they can inflict those losses. They learned that warrior spirit and willingness to die aren't enough when the enemy has more men, more bullets, more food, more medicine, more everything. They learned that this war they started is one they can't win, not through bravery or determination or any amount of fanatical charging into machine gun fire. That's a terrible lesson to teach, son. Terrible because it was bought with so many lives on both sides. Terrible because it means more fighting and more dying until Japan finally accepts what should be obvious already. Terrible because every day this war continues means more Donnies who'll never play their harmonicas again, more Reds who'll stop laughing, more Ts who'll lose their faith when prayers go unanswered one too many times. You're in training now, Joe, learning to be a soldier, and I know you're thinking about combat and wondering if you'll measure up, if you'll be brave when the time comes, if you'll do your duty and make your old man proud. So let me tell you what I've learned in 6 months of hell on this island. Let me give you the kind of advice they don't put in training manuals or write in recruiting posters. First, you'll be scared, and that's okay. Anyone who says they're not scared in combat is either lying or crazy, and either way, you don't want to be near them when the shooting starts. Fear is natural. Fear is your body's way of telling you you're in danger. Fear is what keeps you alert and careful and alive. The trick isn't to not feel fear. The trick is to function despite the fear, to do your job even though you're terrified, to keep moving forward when every instinct says to freeze or run. Second, take care of your men if you're lucky enough to lead them, and take care of your buddies if you're not. This war isn't won by individual heroes, Joe. It's won by units that function as teams, by men who trust each other and look out for each other and share the burden of survival. The Marine next to you in the foxhole, he's your brother now, more than blood could ever make him. You keep him alive, he keeps you alive, and together you both have a better chance of going home. Third, don't believe the propaganda about the enemy being subhuman, or cowardly or inferior. The Japanese soldiers I've fought are brave, son, braver than most men I've known. They're just brave in service of a cause that's wrong, fighting for an empire built on conquest and cruelty. Respect their courage while defeating their cause. Kill them when you must, but don't hate them. Don't dehumanize them. Don't let this war turn you into something you won't recognize when you look in the mirror after it's over. Fourth, find ways to stay human. Music like Donnie's harmonica, humor like Red's jokes, faith like T's prayers. Find something that reminds you you're more than just a weapon, more than just a tool for killing. This war will try to strip away everything that makes you human, will try to reduce you to nothing but survival instinct and trigger finger. Fight that, Joe. Fight to maintain your humanity as hard as you fight to maintain your position. And fifth, write home. Write to me. Write to your mother. Write to anyone who's waiting for you. Tell us you're alive. Tell us what you're thinking and feeling. Tell us about the men you serve with and the places you go. Not just because we worry, though God knows we do, but because writing helps you process what you're experiencing, helps you maintain connection to the world you're fighting to get back to, helps you remember that this war is temporary even when it feels eternal. I'm one of the lucky ones, Joe. Survived 6 months on Guadalcanal with nothing worse than shrapnel wounds and malaria, and the kind of psychological damage that'll probably stay with me until I die. But survival comes with its own burden, its own weight, that's different from but no lighter than death. I carry Donnie's harmonica and the memory of his music. I carry the faces of every man in my unit who didn't make it, their names and their hometowns and the dreams they had about what they'd do after the war. I carry the sound of the Browning firing until the barrel glowed red, the sight of the Tenaroo River running black with blood, the smell of the jungle and death and 6 months of living in hell. And I carry guilt, son. Guilt that I survived when younger men died. Guilt that my experience and rank meant I could often stay in relative safety while sending boys into danger. Guilt that I'm writing this letter to you when other fathers are receiving telegrams about their sons. No amount of reasoning makes that guilt go away, no intellectual understanding that I did my duty and followed orders and made the best decisions I could with the information I had. The guilt remains, because survival demands it, because living when others died requires some kind of payment, some acknowledgement that chance and luck played as much role in my survival as any skill or experience I brought to combat. But I'm also proud, Joe, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that pride even though it exists alongside the guilt and the horror and the exhaustion. Proud that we held this island. Proud that we stopped the Japanese advance. Proud that American Marines proved they could fight and win in conditions that should have broken us. Proud of the men I led, the Marines who became my family, the boys who became warriors and somehow maintained their humanity despite everything. Proud that when this war is written into history books, Guadalcanal will be remembered as the place where America went on the offensive, where we stopped retreating and started advancing, where we learned we could beat an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. That pride has to mean something, Joe. Has to justify the cost, has to make sense of the sacrifice, has to ensure that Donnie and all the others didn't die for nothing. Otherwise, what was the point? Otherwise, it's just murder and waste, just young men dying in a jungle for reasons they didn't fully understand, just 14,800 Japanese and maybe 3,000 Americans dead on an island most people had never heard of before this war and will forget about after it's over. The division is rotating off the island soon, Joe. Heading to Australia for rest and refit, and the kind of hot meals and cold beer and sleeping without fear of night attacks that we've been dreaming about for 6 months. Then probably more islands, more fighting, more jungles or beaches or whatever terrain the Pacific War demands we fight on. The road to Tokyo is long and will be paid for in American blood and Marine lives, but we'll travel it because we have to, because the alternative is letting fascism and imperialism and evil triumph simply because stopping them is hard and costly and demands more than we think we have to give. But I'm thinking about after, son. About when this war is finally over, and we've beaten both Germany and Japan, and the world can start rebuilding. Thinking about coming home to Scranton, back to that house where we played baseball in the backyard, back to work at the mill and coaching youth league, and the simple quiet life that seems impossibly precious, now that I've spent 6 months in hell. Thinking about teaching you everything I've learned not about war but about survival after war, about carrying the weight without being crushed by it, about maintaining hope when experience suggests despair is more rational. We'll talk then, Joe. We'll sit on the back porch with root beers like we used to, and I'll tell you everything I couldn't put in letters, everything the censors wouldn't allow, everything that needs to be said face to face between father and son. I'll tell you about the fear and the courage, about the friends I made and lost, about what it's like to kill and to watch men die, and to survive when you probably shouldn't have. And you'll tell me about your war, about what you experienced and felt and learned, and together we'll try to make sense of it, Try to find meaning in the chaos. Try to build lives that honor the men who didn't make it home. Keep yourself safe, son. Train hard. Learn everything they teach you. Listen to your NCOs because they've survived situations that killed less careful men. Be brave when you need to be brave, but don't confuse bravery with foolishness. There's no honor in dying unnecessarily, no glory in taking risks that don't serve the mission. Come home to me, Joe. Come home to your mother, and to the life you left behind, and to the future that's waiting for you, if you can just survive long enough to claim it. The jungle hums around me as I finish this letter, rain drumming on my helmet, mud squelching under my boots, the smell of rot and growth and the eternal cycle of life and death that continues regardless of human warfare. In a few days we'll leave this place, board ships that'll take us away from Guadalcanal and its ghosts and its lessons bought with blood. But part of me will always be here, Joe. Will always be in that foxhole at the Tanaru River, or on Bloody Ridge, or in the jungle where Donnie played his harmonica for the last time. Part of every man who fought here will stay here forever. Will be absorbed into the soil and the trees and the rain that'll keep falling long after we're all dead, and this war is just history. Remember us, son. Remember what we did here. What it cost. What it bought. Remember that freedom isn't free. That peace is maintained by men willing to fight for it. That the comfortable world you knew before Pearl Harbor was built on the willingness of previous generations to sacrifice for principles larger than themselves. And if this war demands the same sacrifice from you, and it probably will, you're of military age and they're drafting everyone, then make that sacrifice knowing your old man is proud of you, knowing that you come from a line of men who did their duty when called, knowing that whatever courage you need to face what's coming, you've got it in you because you're my son and I know what you're made of. Your old man, still breathing in this jungle, Frank Geisant Frank D. 1st Marine Division, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. February 9th, 1943. I'm sending you Donnie's harmonica with this letter, Joe, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the sea air during shipping. Keep it safe for me. Keep it as a reminder that even in the worst circumstances, men find ways to create beauty, to maintain humanity, to remember home. Maybe someday you'll learn to play it. Make music that Donnie would have made if he'd survived. Give voice to the songs that died with him on Bloody Ridge. Or maybe you'll just keep it as I've kept it, as a sacred object. A memorial to a boy who never got to become the man he should have been. Either way, handle it with respect, Joe. It's been through hell and survived, just like your father. Frank returned from Guadalcanal to Australia in March 1943, his body carrying malaria and shrapnel wounds, his mind carrying memories that would never fully fade. The 1st Marine Division rested and refitted, and Frank continued serving, fighting on Cape Gloucester and Peleliu before the war's end. He survived every battle, defied every statistic that said men his age shouldn't survive Pacific combat, and came home to Scranton in late 1945 with a chest full of medals and a silence about his experiences that would last the rest of his life. He never spoke about Guadalcanal, never told stories or attended reunions or participated in the celebrations that marked anniversaries of the battle. When Joe asked him about it, and Joe only asked once, right after receiving the harmonica, Frank simply said, "We did what needed doing." That's all there is to say. The harmonica stayed on Frank's nightstand for 40 years, silent and sacred, covered in red Solomon Islands dirt that he never cleaned off, a memorial to Private Donnie W. and all the other Marines who didn't come home. Joe survived his own war service, deployed to Europe in 1944, fought in the Battle of the Bulge and the Rhine Crossing, came home with his own wounds and his own silence to mirror his father's. They worked together at the steel mill after the war, father and son standing at adjacent stations, communicating more through shared silence than they ever had through words. They understood each other in ways that only combat veterans can, understood the weight of survival and the guilt of living when others died, and the impossibility of explaining any of it to people who hadn't been there. Frank died in 1987 at age 88, his lungs finally giving out from decades of smoking and the malaria that had never quite left his system. At his funeral, elderly men showed up wearing Marine Corps League jackets and dress blues that no longer quite fit. Veterans of Guadalcanal and other Pacific battles who'd served with or under Gunnery Sergeant D, who'd learned from him how to survive jungle warfare and maintain humanity despite circumstances that should have stripped it away. They spoke of his leadership, his courage, his ability to keep young Marines alive through situations that killed more experienced men. Joe found the harmonica when cleaning out his father's things, found it still on the nightstand where it had sat for 4 decades, still covered in that red dirt, still carrying the weight of stories never told. With it was a note in his father's handwriting, "For Joe, when you're old enough to understand." And Joe, now 63 himself, finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him across all those years of silence, that some experiences can't be explained, only witnessed, that some weights can't be shared, only carried, that some sacrifices can't be repaid, only remembered. The Battle of Guadalcanal marked a turning point in the Pacific War, the first major Allied offensive against Japan, the place where Japanese forces learned that courage and fanatical determination couldn't overcome American industrial might and coordinated combined arms warfare. Of the approximately 36,000 Japanese soldiers who fought on the island, nearly 15,000 died from combat, disease, or starvation. American casualties were lighter, about 7,000 total, including all services, but the psychological impact was profound. Men who fought on Guadalcanal carried those memories for life, the jungle and the heat and the constant rain and the night attacks, and the slow, grinding realization that this war would be won not through heroism, but through logistics, not through individual courage, but through systemic superiority in every category that mattered. Frank's generation learned to fear speaking about what they'd done and seen, learned that civilians didn't want to hear about the reality of combat, that the comfortable post-war world preferred its veterans silent and its wars sanitized. But the silence carried its own cost, left wounds untreated, traumas unprocessed, guilt unresolved. Frank carried Guadalcanal with him every day for 44 years, carried it in his nightmares and his silences, and the way he'd sometimes freeze when tropical rain fell on Pennsylvania, and for just a moment he was back in that jungle, back in that hell, back with the men who didn't make it home. If this letter moved you, if Frank's words and the sacrifice of Guadalcanal's Marines deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel and leave your like. Every subscription helps us preserve voices like theirs, voices that remind us that freedom was bought one muddy inch at a time, that peace was purchased with blood and courage and the willingness of men like Frank to leave safety and fight in jungles that should have killed them. There are thousands more stories untold. Fathers like Frank who fought so their sons might have better wars or no wars at all. Sons like Joe who inherited their father's courage and carried it to different battlefields. Marines like Donnie W., who brought music to hell and left their harmonicas behind as memorials. Corporals like Red who used humor as armor against horror. Lieutenants like T who found faith in circumstances that should have destroyed it. Your support keeps their memory alive. Your subscription ensures the next generation understands that the Pacific War wasn't won by individual heroes, but by ordinary men doing extraordinary things in circumstances beyond imagination. Subscribe. Leave your like. Share this story. And if someone in your family served in World War II, particularly in the Pacific Theater, write their name in the comments. Let's honor them together. Guadalcanal broke the myth of Japanese invincibility, proved that courage without logistics loses to logistics every time, demonstrated that American industrial might could sustain forces that Asian warrior spirit could not match. It was where Japan learned to fear not individual American soldiers, but the factories and supply chains behind them, where fanatical banzai charges met coordinated combined arms warfare, and discovered that belief in spiritual superiority cannot overcome material superiority in every category that matters. But more than strategic victory, Guadalcanal was where men like Frank learned what they were capable of enduring, what they could survive, what price they would pay for victory, and whether that price was worth paying. It was where boys became men, and men became ghosts of themselves, where courage was redefined from glorious to enduring, where sacrifice meant not dying heroically, but living afterward with memories that never faded. Frank D. Joe D. Donnie W. Harris, Red. K. Lieutenant M.T. The 7,000 Americans who died on Guadalcanal and the 4,800 Japanese who died there. Their names deserve to be spoken, their sacrifices deserve to be remembered. Their legacy, not glory, but endurance, not heroism but survival, not triumph but the grim satisfaction of having done what needed doing regardless of cost. That legacy deserves to be honored with understanding, with gratitude, with recognition that the world we inhabit was built on foundations of mud and blood and the determination of men who refused to quit, even when quitting seemed rational. The jungle has reclaimed Guadalcanal now, grown over the foxholes and the battlefields and the places where men died by the thousands. The rain still falls, washing away the last physical traces of the campaign that changed the Pacific War. But the memory remains, carried forward by those who fought there and those who inherited their stories, preserved in letters and testimonies, and the silent understanding between veterans who know what combat costs and why some things can never be explained, only witnessed. Their voices. Our mission. Over and out.